So as you know, over the course of the last 4 years, Donald Trump's relationship with the late, great hero, John McCain, wasn't always the best. In fact, it was John McCain's wife that recently came out, said that she's going to be supporting Joe Biden. And there's a lot of other Republicans out there that have done the same. So on the line, we have a man who's a former McCain advisor. He's got a great new book out. It's called The Luckiest Man, Life with John McCain. He knows John McCain inside and out and his wonderful family, so we're very lucky to have him on the line. His name is Mark Salter, and he joins us right now. Mark, I appreciate you coming on. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
So, Mark, I guess the first question is, what are your thoughts on the debate last night? What did you think about it?
Oh, I thought, both candidates, I think, improved over their previous performance. President Trump was a lot more settled down than he was the first time, and
Sure.
I thought former Vice President Biden was sharper and a little more aggressive than he was last time. I thought both of them did a much better job, but I think Biden went in there with a 6, 7, 8, 9-point lead, something like that, and I don't think anything happened to close that lead.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. I don't think it's going to move the needle one way or the other. I agree with you 100%. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for you to be so close to John McCain, as I've always said, a hero, a great man, a man of dignity and class, and same goes for his family, especially his wife. I got to ask you, what went through your mind when Donald Trump was sitting on that stage and he said he didn't respect John McCain because he was captured? What's going through your mind, and what was John McCain's reaction when you spoke to him about that?
Well, I got a little worked up about it. We both have Irish tempers, John and I, and he joked once when he made me his chief of staff that we both had tempers and one of us should do something about that. But I got a little worked up, and I called him on the phone, and I was cussing a little bit, and he told me to settle down. He said that all Trump had done was get everybody talking about what a war hero he was for the weekend, and that was Trump's problem, not his.
Right,
so
right.
He had a pretty.
Isn't that incredible that here's this?
Reaction.
Isn't that incredible, Mark? That here's a man, as you know, that was a POW for 5 years. Who I can't even imagine the suffering he went through, and he's telling you as an advisor that you should calm down. Doesn't that say a little bit about the man, John McCain, right? And who he was? I think that's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, he was pretty secure. He was comfortable in his own skin. He didn't suffer a lot of self-doubt or anything like that that would get him. It was hard to. I mean, you could get him riled up. He'd love to argue and fight about stuff, but you couldn't. Attacks on his person didn't really irritate him. Well,
Sure.
It might irritate him, but it didn't get him too worked up.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in this book that you wrote called The Luckiest Man, Life with John McCain. One interesting part of your book, and there's many of them, is when John McCain, leading up to the events of John McCain, his diagnosis of terminal brain cancer, you guys had conversations. You had conversations with the senator about his illness and what he hoped to accomplish in the remaining time he had on the planet Earth. I mean, that's incredible. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. He was, as you might expect for a man with his reputation, he faced his mortality pretty bravely, but with a sense of urgency to get things done that were important to him. He and I were working on his last book at the time, and he wanted to sort of change that a little bit to be a more personal testament than we had been writing. And he wanted to get all his archives in order, his papers in order, and he wanted to use his remaining months and his funeral to send a message of how privileged he felt to be able to serve this country for 60 years, and how important this country was to the people who lived here, but to the world, and that we had more in common than we have in disagreement. And he wanted his funeral and everything he said in that time to sort of underscore that fact. That's why he asked the two men who defeated him for the presidency to speak at his funeral, and.
Right.
And it was an inspiring end to a brave, patriotic life.
No question about that. Again, if you're just joining us, he's Mark Salter, former John McCain advisor, his new book out, The Luckiest Man. So I want to get to the relationship that John McCain had with Joe Biden. But before we get there, let's get Donald Trump out of the way first.
Sure.
In private conversations that you had with John McCain that you can share with us, overall, what was John McCain's overall opinion of Donald Trump, the campaign, and Donald Trump, the president? What were those conversations like with you and John McCain?
Well, he didn't vote for him. He announced that he wasn't going to vote for him. He was appalled by Trump's attack on the Khan family. He didn't think Trump was prepared or really had the character to be a good president, so he didn't vote for him. He was impressed with some of President Trump's appointments, particularly Secretary Mattis, General McMaster, and General Kelly were all people that John thought very highly of. And when I would express concerns about Trump after Trump was inaugurated, John would tell me, as long as those guys are there, we're okay. Those guys aren't there anymore now, so
right.
I don't know what he'd be saying today. But I assume he wouldn't be voting for Trump, obviously, this time either. But he had a little history with him, but not so much that he ever really took Trump seriously. So it's the human rights, the promotion of American values in the world, America's alliances in the world, those mattered very much to John. They were the focus of most of his service, and he would have, I think, been pretty alarmed at the state of the world and Trump's failure to what he judged at the time to be his failure to recognize Putin as an adversary. Those things would have, concerned him, but he would have done what he could to keep things from going off the rails. But I imagine he would probably be doing what his wife is indeed doing, endorsing Joe Biden. Now that's a hard thing for a former Republican nominee to do. But somebody asked me, well, why do you think that? And I said, well, he didn't vote for Trump the first time, and Trump doesn't really improve on longer acquaintance. So I assume that's
right. So Trump has been proven to be a pretty war-averse president. In fact, he's been very much involved in negotiating peace deals. He just finished another one today with Sudan and Israel. Do you think that John McCain would give him any credit for those?
I'd give him credit for the deals with the Emirates and Sudan to those announcements. Yes, I think he'd recognize that. He'd be fair about it, that it is in advance, but he'd also be concerned about a host of other issues. Certainly concerned with the state of our alliances and with Putin's unanswered aggression, really. I know the harshest statement he ever released, foreign policy critique of a president, was a statement he released over the Helsinki summit when President Trump appeared to take the word of Vladimir Putin over the U.S. intelligence agencies.
Right, which is something I talk about on this show all the time, which I thought was one of the most disgraceful moments thus far in Donald Trump's presidency, taking the word of an evil, murderous dictator over our own intelligence, the FBI and the CIA. I thought that was disgraceful. I want to ask you about the relationship between... Well, let me start with this before I get to Joe Biden, because I want to talk about the relationship John McCain had with Joe Biden. One of the moments I'm 40 years old, Mark, and a moment that got me goosebumps was the moment when John McCain took the microphone from the woman when he was speaking, when she made racist, xenophobic comments about Barack Obama. I'm sure you remember that moment, as we all do. And when he took that, you were there. And so when he takes that microphone, I got goosebumps, and I said, what a wonderful man. What a good, decent human being, because I don't think there's a lot of Republicans or Democrats that would have done something like that. Can you compare that situation and that moment and what went through your mind at that moment to where we're at now with Donald Trump if somebody said that at a Trump rally?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't think they get criticized by the candidate as those people were. She was one of several people at that. It was kind of a town hall-ish type event that we were doing in suburban Twin Cities, and we had been. I always try to explain this. You really can't hear what's going on when you're the candidate and you're up on stage. You just hear general crowd noise, and,
right?
But for things have been getting a little heated out there, and people have been shouting things at a few McCain rallies, and the press were coming up to us and telling us, "Hey, in the back of the room, there are three guys, calling Obama a terrorist or something." And so we had mentioned it to him, and he just casually said, "Hey, okay, if I hear something, I'll take care of it." Because I mean, I guess the important thing for a genuine statesman is to understand that there's something that you're in the business for something more important than your own political
Sure.
career, and that was always the case for John. So he heard that woman. She was rather elderly and seemed a little confused. So he didn't want to be too rough on her, but he was pretty firm with her. But there were a couple of other people that said something similar, and he said, "Look, I'm running against Barack Obama because I don't agree with him, and I think I'll be a better president. But you don't have to be scared of this guy. He's a decent American."
Right,
and,
right.
That really. It seems now when we look back on it, at the time it made news, but it wasn't quite the story it seems to have become in hindsight, because our politics have gotten so much worse.
I know.
In the last 12 years, where we feel like where anything is fair game. It doesn't have to have a shred of truth behind it. It's just,
right. Sad.
Any allegation, any attack is fine. It's unfortunate.
Well, I just want to say that moment is a moment that'll go down in political history as a great moment for America. I really, truly believe that, and I think that moment goes to show you the type of person that John McCain was. All right, so let's move on now, Mark, to Joe Biden. The thing I love about this relationship, and maybe you could shed light on this, is the fact that McCain's family talks about this. Jill Biden talked about this a lot, that John McCain and Joe Biden didn't see eye to eye with a lot of political issues, right? But the thing about their relationship was they were able to have a beer at the end of the day, have dinner, joke around, and they were very close. In fact, it's my understanding that Biden saw John McCain not too long later where, John McCain lost his life, and they had a lot of conversations before John McCain sadly lost his life. Can you just shed a little light on their relationship over the years, which I really think is incredible?
Sure. Well, they were friends before John was a senator. John's last job in the Navy was the Navy's liaison to the Senate, which is essentially the Navy's lobbyist to the Senate. And he would travel quite often with a number of senators overseas as part of his responsibilities. And he got to know quite a few guys, and he was almost a protege to guys like John Tower and Scoop Jackson and some of the more senior members of the Armed Service Committee and Foreign Relations Committees. But he became kind of a peer and a friend to a lot of younger senators, including Joe Biden at the time. It was Joe Biden that actually urged him to go up and introduce himself to Cindy McCain, then Cindy Hensley at the time. So they had a friendship that predated John's own entry into politics, and that's important to remember. They did disagree on a host of issues. I mean, McCain was, center right. Joe Biden is center left. It's the differences aren't vast in the United States, despite how angrily we get about them. But they're worth arguing about. And John loved to fight and argue about stuff, and so did Biden. And he'd go at it, same as he'd go at it with Ted Kennedy or others. But they were friends. They'd have a meal afterwards because they were friends. They were just arguing politics. I argue politics with my friends all the time, and they don't stop being my friends. And he was, he as a friend, he cared, he knew what Joe Biden had suffered, the losses Joe Biden had suffered. He was quite close, John, to Joe's son, Beau, both his sons when they were little, because John knew Biden just a few years after he lost his first wife and daughter in that terrible automobile accident. So he'd known Biden's kids all the time they were growing up, and was, I'm sure, was felt terribly and tried to console his friend Joe Biden when Beau died, and Beau died of the same cancer that John McCain had. And
I was unaware of that.
John McCain.
Wow.
So one of the first calls was, of course, when the news broke that John had been diagnosed with it, was from Vice President Biden, and who just had a lot of good practical advice for him, but also obviously offered all his support. But I think Biden was probably out to see him for just a month, maybe a few weeks before he died, and a lot of people had gone to say goodbye to him. So it's kind of the sad, poignant part to that disease. But he had time to say goodbye to a lot of people who mattered to him, and Joe Biden was one of them.
Yeah, and that's
spoke at his funeral. And
sure, and that's so important, and I'm so glad to hear that. By the way, I have to ask you about this because I know in the movies not everything is considered fact, but of course I'm talking about the movie Game Change and the decision that led up to John McCain picking Sarah Palin as his vice presidential running mate. I would imagine, and I'm assuming that you saw this movie. What did you think of that movie, and did you think it was somewhat factual? And just what are your thoughts on that? I'm curious.
Somewhat factual. somewhat exaggerated, but what he had wanted to pick, he had wanted to go do a pretty bold thing, which was to ask a former Democrat and at that time an independent, Joe Lieberman, to be his running mate. We were his aides, including me, convinced him that would cause a furor at the convention among very conservative and not even very conservative, just conservative Republicans, who pro-life, and Joe Lieberman, who was his friend and very close friend, wasn't, and then we just thought we'd have a divided party coming out of the convention. It'd be very difficult. You don't want to come out of your convention, in a fight with your own party. You want to come out of your convention with a head of steam and a few points ahead of your opponent, and the party unified behind you. So we convinced him not to do that, and he wasn't too happy about that. So he spent a week sort of not picking anybody else, and but then we were some people talked to him about Sarah Palin. He was looking not at the conventional take on that, as he wanted to go shore up his support in the base. We thought his support with the base was just fine coming out of the convention. He did, and we knew it would be.
Right.
So we didn't think he needed to do something like that, but he did want somebody. Remember, that was a change. Right track, wrong track. I think the wrong track number,
right,
which is an important indicator of where things are going in the campaign, was about 88 at the time. President Bush, God bless him, a fine man, was very unpopular at the time, and McCain was seen as the Republican, successor to Bush. And it was a problem. That we had to. It was a change election. We had to get a piece of the change message, which Obama owned at the time, and really owned until Election Day. And so he wanted to pick a fresh face, but someone who had sort of independent maverick credentials, reformer credentials. Sarah Palin she'd only been governor for a couple of years, but she had taken on the Republican establishment to win that election. She'd taken on the oil companies, and she was, in the first few weeks after we picked her, she was, it was quite a tension getting picked, and we came out of that convention with about a 5-point lead over Obama.
But do you think? But do you think, Mark, that in the end, Sarah Palin might have hurt his presidential campaign more than helped? What are your thoughts on that?
Maybe, probably a little bit. She wasn't ready. It proved to be a mistake.
Right.
Not her fault. And he never said, he said, I regretted not picking Joe Lieberman. He never said he regretted Sarah Palin. But she wasn't ready. It was a mistake. It did cost him part of what had been his message, an experience argument against Obama, and she didn't have enough experience, and she kind of withered a little under the pressure. It's very hard. No one who's never done it, including even aides who've been involved in presidential campaigns, can appreciate just how intense that spotlight is.
No question.
Just what a
no question.
It can bend, wither a lot of strong people who are strong otherwise.
No question, and I completely agree with you. That's very fair what you're saying. I want to ask you another Trump question, because there's a portion of your book that people don't maybe not be aware of. I don't know if it's public. An early confrontation that John McCain had with, at the time, casino owner Donald Trump way back in the day. Can you tell me exactly what happened? Because I didn't know this story, and you talk about it in detail in your book. Tell our listeners a little bit about this.
Yeah. Well, John McCain he was chair at various times. He was chairman of the Select Committee on Indian Affairs. Obviously, there are a lot of Native Americans in Arizona, and he had very good relationships with the tribes. And he never begrudged tribes casinos, because they were bringing revenue, and so reservations are often some of the poorest places in this country. It was bringing revenue, and it was being shared with members of the tribe, and so he was supportive of Indian gaming and passed legislation to regulate it, but that allowed it. And Donald Trump at the time was a casino owner, and obviously viewed Indian casinos as competition, and was opposed to it. So I think it was a House hearing that McCain was going to testify at, and Trump was going to testify at, or was there to listen to, or something. But McCain came walking over from the Senate side. We could see Trump. We never took that seriously at the time. This is the early 90s. sort of calling his name and waving at him to come. He wanted to talk to him, and John just ignored him and kept going. And Trump kept indicating he wanted to talk to him, and John just kept going by him. And all of a sudden, Trump yelled at him, "Hey, I gave money to your campaign." And McCain looked over his shoulder and yelled back, "See what that'll get you."
Oh, that's great. I didn't know that. Why do you think at that time John McCain had reacted that way towards Trump?
Excuse me a second. I'm going to sneeze.
Oh, that's okay. It happens.
I just think at that time Trump just had kind of a colorful reputation, but not a reputation of being a serious person. And John didn't take him seriously, I guess.
Well, you know what? There's a lot of people that feel the same way now, including myself. So I certainly agree with that sentiment. It appears as though John McCain's instincts were probably right back then. I think a lot of people feel that way now, but I speak for myself on that one. Well, this is a really, really interesting book, and it gives a lot of details of the life and the relationship you had with John McCain. Just the man. But I have to ask you this, because, and I touched on it to start this interview, Mark. The people out there to this day that take, and I think it's a minority, but people like Donald Trump who want to attack John McCain for his vote on health care, who want to attack John McCain and call him a deserter and he's not a hero, and kind of take the tune of Donald Trump, which, by the way, for the record, I think is completely disgusting. What would you say to those people knowing John McCain the way you did?
Very few of you will ever sacrifice as much for this country as John McCain did. He wasn't a perfect person. He made mistakes in his life, and he was often the first person to admit those mistakes. But he got up every day and tried to figure out a way that he could make this country a better place for people and a better force for good in the world. And there aren't enough people like that in our public life in either party, and we ought to appreciate the ones that we have.
No question. Really well said. Well, Mark, your book is fantastic. It's The Luckiest Man, Life with John McCain. Tell me how people can get their hands on this wonderful book.
Your independent bookstores, your chain bookstores, Amazon.com, it's available everywhere.
Well, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your service to this country and for working with John McCain, and I appreciate the stories that you've shared and shedding some light. If people didn't already know what a hero and what a wonderful person John McCain is, you might want to read this book. Mark Salter, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
No, thanks a lot, Mark.
You bet. There we go. Mark Salter. Household